General Hospital will reveal this year's Nurses' Ball unfolded under an atmosphere of breathtaking grandeur. Where the dazzling stage lights did more than showcase vibrant performances, they cloaked the shadows of secrets waiting to detonate. Port Charles, dressed in glittering gowns and tuxedos, collectively held its breath, teetering on the edge of anticipation and apprehension. The air was electric, buzzing with whispered speculation about the identity of the mysterious guest whose arrival promised not merely spectacle but a seismic shift in the balance of power, love, and loyalty. Every pair of eyes searched the crowd, every camera trained toward the wings of the stage, waiting for the moment when fantasy would collide with reality. And then, the music stopped. The hush was deafening as the velvet curtain at the rear of the stage trembled before drawing back, revealing a silhouette the town hadn't seen in years, yet no one had ever truly forgotten. Brenda emerged, her presence like a tidal wave crashing through the illusion of calm that the Nurses' Ball tried so desperately to project. She didn't walk into the room, she claimed it. Adorned in a breathtaking black gown that clung to her every curve with an elegance laced in menace. She was not a performer in this grand spectacle. She was a reckoning. She was the past, present, and uncertain future of Sonny's crumbling empire, dressed to devastate and moving with a predator's grace. Every head turned, every murmur died, and Sonny, seated in the front row beside his carefully curated family image, felt his breath abandon him. Brenda's return was no coincidence, no random RSVP to a society gala. Her timing was too precise. Her entrance too calculated, and her silence too loud. She didn't need applause. The room itself applauded in awe-stricken silence. Her gaze swept the crowd, not with curiosity, but with possession. And when her eyes locked with Sonny's, the world seemed to stop spinning, for him, at least. In that moment, he was no longer the reformed mob boss seeking peace for the sake of his children, nor the man standing at the crossroads of redemption. He was once again the dangerous king of shadows, enthralled by the one woman who knew the blueprint of his heart and the map to his destruction. The ghost of a love too volatile to die had walked back into his life, not as a memory, but as a force with an agenda. It wasn't just the shock of Brenda's presence that made the room feel as though it had tilted on its axis. It was the implications. Whispers erupted like wildfire behind champagne glasses and faux smiles. Because those who knew, understood, this was more than an old flame rekindled. This was an earthquake. Brenda had ties not only to Sonny, but to Lois, who herself was clinging to a secret that could rewrite the lineage of an entire family. Brenda's presence threatened to unravel that fragile knot of silence. The truth about Joe's paternity, a truth Lois had buried beneath layers of loyalty and fear, now hung in the air like a guillotine. Brenda wasn't here for the pageantry. She was here to light the match, whether knowingly or not, and Port Charles was the powder keg. Lois watched from the shadows, her pulse racing, her mind calculating. She had worked tirelessly to preserve the illusion that Joe's parentage was unremarkable, that Dante was simply another piece of the Corinthos legacy, nothing more, nothing less. But Brenda, with her history, her intuition, and her penchant for emotional chaos, posed a danger no one could predict. Even if Brenda had no intention of exposing the truth, her very presence could provoke questions, reactions, and revelations. A single look, a careless remark, or an emotional slip from Sonny could unravel everything Lois had protected. Meanwhile, Sonny sat frozen, a man caught between the life he had fought to escape and the woman who embodied the part of him he feared he could never truly abandon. Brenda hadn't changed in the way that mattered, she was still magnetic, unpredictable, and dangerously perceptive. Her return felt less like a chapter reopening and more like a new war being declared. And Sonny knew, deep down, that no matter how far he had come, no matter how many lines he had redrawn, Brenda could blur them all with a single glance. The Nurses' Ball, traditionally a night of charity and celebration, had transformed into a battlefield dressed in sequins. Behind every smile was a motive, behind every toast a scheme. And at the center of it all, Brenda stood, not as a guest, but as a catalyst. Sonny's empire, already teetering from custody battles, power struggles, and the silent threats posed by Drew's ambition, now faced a danger far more personal and insidious. Brenda didn't need to pull a trigger or raise her voice. Her arrival was the shot heard around Port Charles. She had thrown Sonny into an emotional spiral, rekindled the parts of him that he had buried alongside the bodies of his enemies, and made every carefully constructed promise of peace feel like a lie he could no longer keep. There was no escaping the truth that Brenda represented. She was everything Sonny had sworn to leave behind: passion without boundaries, loyalty without reason, and destruction without apology. And as the night wore on, as the ball carried on its glittering charade, one thing became clear. Brenda hadn't just returned to see old friends. She had come to reclaim something. Whether it was Sonny's heart, his soul, or his kingdom, no one could be sure. But she would not leave without leaving a mark. Port Charles would never be the same again. And neither would Sonny. Sonny once stood before his inner circle and declared with conviction that he was walking away from the blood-stained empire he had built brick by brick with equal parts fear and loyalty. It was not a decision made lightly. The violent clashes with Carly over the custody of their children had taken their toll, fracturing what little remained of their once unbreakable bond. His children, once innocent spectators to the life he led, had now become collateral damage in a war waged in courtrooms and private chambers instead of dark alleyways. And beyond the personal battles lay another front. Drew, the ever-ambitious manipulator, had begun to align himself with Sonny's enemies, testing every inch of the fragile truce that had held Port Charles together in recent months. These threats were real, tangible, and calculable, something Sonny could prepare for. But he had never prepared for her. Brenda was not a threat he could disarm with strategy or muscle. She was a storm disguised as a memory. A force that transcended logic and battered down walls Sonny had built in solitude and pain. There was no gun more dangerous than her eyes, still ablaze with the same passion. The same unspoken power that once undid him with a whisper. Her arrival shattered every promise he had made to himself, igniting questions where there had once been certainty. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone shook the very foundations of his resolve. She was not merely a ghost from his past, she was the embodiment of everything he had tried to suppress. The intoxicating pull of dominance, the lure of danger, and the seductive voice of legacy calling him back. One glance. One single glance across a crowded room was all it took to unravel Sonny's carefully stitched facade. As Brenda stood under the spotlights of the nurses' ball, surrounded by applause and awe, Sonny wasn't looking at a woman. He was looking at an era, the apex of his reign, the fever pitch of his identity, the crucible where power and desire collided without apology. And in the stillness of that moment, Sonny felt the tectonic plates of his world shift. He wasn't sure if the air left his lungs because he was breathless with nostalgia or if the cold realization struck that the life he'd been trying to leave behind had just stepped into the room, wrapped in silk and shadows. Brenda had not come to destroy him, at least, not in the traditional sense. But her influence was a weapon of its own. One that chipped away at his rationality with every heartbeat. She reignited a fire he had spent years trying to smother with responsibility and regret. She reminded him of the man he had been. The man who once wielded fear like a crown, who ruled not with compromise, but with conviction. And now, staring at her, Sonny began to question whether walking away was ever truly possible. Or if the underworld he built had already etched itself into his blood so deeply that retreat was simply a myth. While Sonny struggled with this silent implosion, Lois stood to the side, watching everything with the quiet dread of someone who had already foreseen the storm and prayed in vain it would pass them by. She knew Brenda in ways most didn't. She knew the steel behind the beauty, the strategy beneath the allure. Brenda was no pawn moved by affection or nostalgia, she was a tactician cloaked in velvet. A woman who wielded chaos when it suited her needs. Lois feared not that Brenda would act recklessly, But that every move Brenda made was purposeful, and that purpose might very well unravel everything. Especially Gio. Lois had fought to keep Joe's true parentage buried beneath layers of silence, diversion, and sacrifice. She had protected him not just from public scrutiny, but from the weight of a name that could suffocate a child before he ever had a chance to define himself. Brenda, knowingly or not, posed the greatest risk to that secret. Her presence alone shifted the balance of trust and attention. She could provoke questions, trigger confessions, pull Sonny into emotional territory where slips and revelations were inevitable. Even if she wasn't actively hunting truths, her mere proximity to them was a danger too close to contain. And so, as Brenda danced her silent war across the ballroom, a different kind of chaos began to ripple outward. Lulu had started digging, quietly, persistently, following threads that led her back to Gio, to Dante, to Lois. The closer she came to the truth, the more volatile the consequences became. Brenda's appearance, whether accidental or engineered, could be the catalyst that exposed it all. If the truth about Gio surfaced, no one would be able to shield him from the consequences, not Lois, not Dante, not Sonny. The child, innocent of the choices made before his birth, would become the center of a legacy he never asked for. A legacy drenched in secrets, betrayal, and blood. Beyond that immediate circle, Brenda's influence spread like wildfire. Carly, clinging desperately to what was left of her fractured family, saw the return of Brenda not only as a threat to Sonny's commitment to his new life, but as a direct attack on the delicate equilibrium she had fought to maintain. Drew, opportunistic and always calculating, saw vulnerability in Sonny for the first time in months, a crack in the armor he could exploit. And Michael, torn between love for his father and the morality of the path he had chosen, found himself questioning the man he had tried so hard to distance himself from. Brenda had turned their world upside down without ever uttering a word. The nurses' ball had promised glamour and goodwill. Instead, it had become a war zone of silences and stolen glances, of reawakened demons and buried truths clawing their way to the surface. Brenda hadn't fired a shot, but she had detonated a memory, a longing, a challenge. And Sonny, for all his resolve and reinvention, now stood at a precipice, trembling beneath the weight of a single question. Could he truly walk away from everything, or was he already on his way back? Was this about love, or about the part of himself he had never really let die? No matter the answer, one thing was certain: Port Charles would never forget the night Brenda returned. And Sonny would never be the same. The nurses' ball, once a glittering testament to hope, community, and charitable goodwill, had been stripped of its innocence. No longer just a celebration of art and healing, it had transformed into a silent battleground of power, secrets, and psychological warfare. Beneath the silk gowns and choreographed performances, something darker simmered, an undercurrent of unresolved history, of whispered betrayals, and of destinies shifting beneath the polished marble floors of Port Charles's most elegant venue. This year, the stage did not belong to the performers. It belonged to a ghost, a woman whose presence rewrote every rule of the game the moment she stepped into the spotlight. Brenda had arrived not as a guest but as a catalyst. Draped in mystery and drenched in unresolved passion, she walked into the grand ballroom like a specter from a time Sonny had tried, and failed, to bury. She didn't just stir memories, she resurrected an entire era, pulling it up from the grave like a revenant with unfinished business. And with her return, she dragged the weight of an empire behind her, an empire Sonny had spent decades building with blood-stained hands and guarded eyes. It was more than love or nostalgia. It was more than a reunion. It was a reckoning. While the crowd laughed and applauded the vibrant musical acts, their attention swallowed by lights and glamour, the true drama unfolded in shadows. Behind the curtains, behind the champagne flutes and red carpet photo ops, a new chapter was beginning, a dangerous, unpredictable era where loyalties would be tested and legacies would collapse under the weight of their own lies. Brenda, without a single declaration, had declared war. Not through malice or calculation, but through the simple truth of her presence. She was the match, and Sonny's empire was soaked in gasoline. He had tried to evolve. To be the father his children needed, the man his family could rely on without fear. But evolution means nothing when history refuses to let go. And Brenda was not just part of Sonny's past, she was the embodiment of it. Every choice she reminded him of, every glance that reignited a dormant fire in his soul, served as a reminder of the king he once was and the chaos that followed him. She didn't ask for forgiveness, because she had nothing to apologize for. She didn't ask for permission, because she didn't need it. She arrived, and in doing so, forced every power player in the room to question their footing. And Sonny. Sonny stood at the edge of everything he had fought for. A single step, a single indulgence in that familiar storm called Brenda, and the fragile balance of peace he had spent years cultivating would collapse. He could feel it, the tug in his chest. The electricity in the air whenever she was near, the temptation to slip back into the persona that once ruled Port Charles with fear, charisma, and absolute certainty. Her reappearance wasn't a chance to reconcile the past. It was a challenge. Do you still remember who you really are? Behind the curtains, the reverberations were already being felt. Deals that had been secured with handshakes now trembled under doubt. Alliances Sonny had forged to protect his family now teetered on the brink of betrayal. People whispered, made calls, adjusted their strategies. Because if Sonny fell, so too would everything built in his name. Brenda had pierced the heart of his empire not with violence, but with vulnerability, the one weapon no one had expected her to wield. Her effect was not theatrical, not melodramatic. It was precise, surgical, devastating. And still, the performances went on. The singers sang. The dancers danced. The audience clapped, laughed, cheered, oblivious to the fact that in that same room, the future of Port Charles was being rewritten. Every word Brenda didn't say became a prophecy. Every move Sonny didn't make became a choice he couldn't take back. And in the spaces between the spotlights, a new world was forming. One where nothing could be trusted, no secret stayed buried, and no legacy was safe. This was no longer the nurse's ball. This was an ambush masked in tulle and diamonds. Brenda's return was not just emotional, it was apocalyptic. She was the final variable in an equation already fraught with too many unknowns. And the empire Sonny had once believed untouchable now stood on trembling ground. Built with blood, sustained by fear, and cloaked in power, it was now vulnerable in its most sacred space. Not from bullets. Not from betrayal. But from a woman whose very existence forced it all to unravel. And so, as the music played and the crowd rose to its feet for another ovation, Sonny remained seated, haunted by the knowledge that nothing he had built was safe anymore. Not his family. Not his throne. Not even the man he had become. Because Brenda had returned, and she had brought the end with her.